At 3:14 a.m., I slipped and fell in the bathroom, lying helpless on the floor while calling my daughter's name for help. But behind her bedroom door, all I could hear was her laughing with her boyfriend as if nothing had happened. My phone rang once, then the sound disappeared into the darkness. The next morning, when the housekeeper noticed the trail leading from the bathroom into the hallway, she looked at me with trembling eyes and whispered, "You really think all of this was just an accident? If you found your way here today, I'm glad you did. Tell me in the comments what city or country are you joining from. It means something to know who's listening." Please note some elements of this story are fictional, included for depth and understanding. Names and settings are not drawn from any specific source, but the truth inside the story is something I believe you'll recognize. I want to tell you about a Tuesday morning in October, because that was the morning everything still looked exactly the way it was supposed to look. My name is Edward Calloway. I am 66 years old. I spent 38 years as an estate attorney in Portland, Oregon, which means I spent 38 years watching families fall apart over money, over pride, over the particular kind of grief that turns people into strangers. I retired 3 years ago after Eleanor passed. I sold the practice to my junior partner, donated my case files to the county bar archive, and moved back into the house Eleanor and I had shared for 31 years, the colonial on Mercer Street with the oak tree in the front yard that she had planted the year Vivian was born. Vivian moved back in 8 months after Eleanor's funeral. She said she was worried about me living alone. She said the house was too big for one person. She said she wanted to be close to help to make sure I was okay. I said yes. Of course I said yes. She was my daughter. That Tuesday morning in October, Vivian was making breakfast when I came downstairs. She had the camera set up on the kitchen counter, the small one she used for her social media, the one she had started using more and more over the past few months to document what she called our life together. She was scrambling eggs with one hand and gesturing toward me with the other, her face lit up the way it gets when she is performing warmth rather than feeling it, though I did not understand that distinction yet. There he is," she said to the camera, her voice full of something bright and easy. "My dad, the Honorable Edward Calloway, up before 8. That's progress." I laughed. I sat down at the table. I let her film me eating breakfast and asking about my plans for the day, and I felt in that moment genuinely lucky. My friends whose children had scattered across the country to build their own lives, I had thought of them with a kind of quiet sympathy. My daughter had come home. My daughter was here. "How are you feeling today?" she asked, setting a plate in front of me. "Any dizziness? You seemed a little unsteady yesterday on the stairs." "I was fine on the stairs," I said. "You grabbed the railing." "I always grab the railing. Your mother installed that railing specifically so I would grab it." She smiled and reached over to squeeze my hand, and the camera caught it, and I remember thinking that the shot was very good. The light from the window, the warmth of her hand over mine. It looked exactly like love. Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it and something shifted in her face so quickly that I almost missed it. Almost. She reached over and turned off the camera. The kitchen felt different with it off. I cannot explain it any other way. It was the same room, the same light, the same eggs on the plate in front of me. But something in the air changed the way air changes before a storm, when the pressure drops, and your body knows before your mind does. "You need to take your second pill," she said. Her voice was different, not cold, exactly efficient. The way she spoke to contractors and service providers, the tone that meant she had a list, and I was somewhere on it. "I took it with the first one," I said. "Dr. Harmon said to space them out." "Dr. Harmon said that in March, and he revised that instruction in—" "Dad." She set her coffee cup down on the counter harder than necessary. "I don't have time to debate this right now. I have a call at 9. Just take the pill." I looked at her. She was already scrolling through her phone, already somewhere else, already done with the conversation. The camera was off. The eggs were getting cold. And I sat at the table in my own kitchen and took the pill because it was easier than not taking it, and told myself she was stressed, she was busy, she was doing so much for me, and I needed to be grateful instead of difficult. I was very good at telling myself things like that. It was only later, after I had washed my plate and gone to my study and sat down at my desk, that I noticed it. My laptop was open. I did not remember leaving it open. On the screen was an email confirmation, an appointment with Cascade Valley Bank for the following Thursday at 2 in the afternoon. An appointment made from my email account, signed with my name confirming that I would be coming in to discuss account restructuring and updated beneficiary designations. I had not made that appointment. I sat very still for a moment. Then I pulled up my sent folder and found the email. It had my name, my signature, my usual closing. It had been sent at 11:47 the previous night while I had been asleep. I heard Vivian's footsteps in the hallway. I closed the laptop before I had time to think about why I was closing it. She knocked and opened the door in the same motion, the way she had started doing lately, not waiting for an answer. "Have you seen my blue cardigan?" she asked. "No," I said. "Vivian, there's a bank appointment on my calendar for Thursday. Did you schedule that? This is Boris. Ons is Bidor." She didn't hesitate, not even a fraction of a second. "Oh, that. Yes, I set that up last week. I was going to tell you. It's just routine updating some of the account information so I can help manage things more easily. You don't have to do anything. I'll handle all the paperwork. I don't recall authorizing you to contact the bank on my behalf." "Dad," she sighed, and the sigh was patient, almost tender, the kind of sigh that says, "I love you, but you are exhausting me. You asked me to help with the finances 3 months ago. Remember, after you got confused about the wire transfer?" I had not gotten confused about the wire transfer. I had questioned a charge I did not recognize, which was not confusion. It was due diligence. It was 38 years of professional habit. But I looked at her face, open, concerned, slightly pained, and I heard myself say, "I suppose I did." She smiled and leaned against the doorframe. "I'm only trying to make things easier for you. That's all I ever want." After she left, I sat at my desk and looked at the closed laptop for a long time. I had spent my career watching people rewrite narratives. I had seen it done clumsily, and I had seen it done brilliantly. I knew what it looked like when someone was building a version of events, patient detail by detail, each small revision so reasonable on its own that you only understood the full shape of it when you stepped back far enough to see the whole thing at once. Someone was building a version of me, and I had been sitting very, very still while it happened. I opened the laptop again and looked at the email. Then I looked at the date, the time, the careful professional language of it. 11:47 at night. While I slept. For the first time in 8 months, I did not tell myself a reason to explain it away. I did not sleep well that night. That was not unusual. I had not slept particularly well since Eleanor died, and I had made a kind of peace with it, the way you make peace with things that are not going to change. But this was different from the ordinary restlessness. I lay in the dark and thought about the email, and the more I thought about it, the more I understood that I was not dealing with a misunderstanding or a well-intentioned overstep. I was dealing with something that had been planned. 11:47 at night. The language precise and formal, the kind of language I had used in professional correspondence for nearly 4 decades. Whoever had written that email knew how I wrote, knew my cadence, my closing, the particular way I structured a request. There was only one person in this house who had read enough of my correspondence to know those things. I got up at 6 and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, alone, the way I used to do when I was preparing for a difficult deposition, letting my mind run through the facts without interference, without the noise of explanation or excuse. By the time Vivian came downstairs at 7:30, I had decided 2 things. First, I would say nothing directly. Second, I would start paying attention in a way I had not been paying attention before. She came into the kitchen, already dressed, already on her phone, already somewhere else. "Morning," she said without looking up. "Good morning, there's coffee." She poured herself a cup and leaned against the counter, still reading whatever was on her screen. I watched her. I had spent 38 years watching people in rooms, watching what they did with their hands when they were lying, watching how they held their shoulders when they were afraid, watching the specific quality of stillness that people perform when they want to seem relaxed and are not. Vivian's stillness this morning was performed. There was a tension in her jaw that she had not quite smoothed away. "I was thinking about Thursday," I said, keeping my voice easy. "The bank appointment." She looked up. "What about it?" "I'd like to review whatever documents they're planning to present before I sign anything." Something moved behind her eyes, quick control gone in less than a second. "Of course, that's totally reasonable. I'll get copies ahead of time." She smiled. "You know, for someone who says he's retired, you're still very much in lawyer mode. That 38 years is hard to turn off." She laughed, the right kind of laugh, the warm one, the one that made you feel included. "I know, Dad. That's one of the things I love about you." She picked up her coffee and her phone and headed toward the hallway. "I have calls all morning. Can you make sure you take the noon medication? I left it on the counter by the sink." "I know where my medication is." "I know you do." The words were gentle. The tone beneath them was not, "I just like to make sure." She was gone before I could respond, which I suspected was intentional. I went to my study. The room had been Eleanor's favorite, the one with the bay window that looked out over the backyard garden she had tended for 20 years. After she died, I had kept everything the way she left it. The books on the shelves in the order she arranged them. The small ceramic dish on the corner of the desk where she kept paper clips. The framed photograph of the two of us on our 20th anniversary, standing in front of the house in the early light, both of us laughing at something the photographer had said. I sat down and opened my laptop and went back to the email. I read it 3 times. Then I opened my calendar. What I found made me sit back in my chair. There were 7 appointments in the past 3 months that I did not remember scheduling. A follow-up with a neurologist I had never agreed to see. A meeting with a financial advisor whose firm I did not recognize. 2 pharmacy pickups listed under my name for prescriptions I had not been told about. And running alongside all of this, woven through the calendar like thread through fabric, were what appeared to be my own notes, brief casual in the first person. Felt confused this morning. Misplaced keys again. Told Vivian about the episode at the grocery store. I had not written any of those notes. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I went to the calendar settings and checked the edit history. Every one of those notes had been added from a device logged into my account, but not from this laptop. A different device accessed through the same login credentials. Someone had my password. I closed the laptop and pressed my palms flat on the desk and breathed. I was a retired estate attorney. I had written more wills and trust documents and guardianship filings than I could count. I knew exactly what a record of confusion and incapacity looked like when it was being assembled for court. I knew what kind of evidence a judge needed to see before granting a petition for legal guardianship over an adult who was deemed unable to manage their own affairs. What I was looking at on my calendar was the beginning of that record. I thought about the way Vivian had answered for me at my last physical, the way she had started attending every doctor's appointment sitting in the corner with her notepad asking questions before I could answer them myself. I thought about the medication she had added to my regimen 6 months ago, something for anxiety. She had said something Dr. Harmon recommended, though. Dr. Harmon had said nothing of the kind to me directly. I thought about the way my house key had been moved from its hook by the front door to a drawer in the kitchen without explanation. Small things, each one small enough to dismiss, each one reasonable enough if you were willing to be reasonable. I had been willing to be reasonable for 8 months. I heard Vivian's voice from upstairs, her work call sharp and efficient, a version of her I was not supposed to hear. I could not make out the words, only the rhythm of them. The rhythm of someone running a meeting, someone accustomed to being obeyed. I pulled a legal pad from the desk drawer and uncapped a pen. I wrote the date at the top. I wrote email 11:47 p.m., not sent by me. I wrote calendar entries device, not mine. I wrote prescriptions not discussed. I wrote notes of incapacity fabricated. Then I stopped and looked at what I had written. For 38 years, I had helped other families protect themselves from exactly this. I had drafted the documents and advised the precautions and sat across from adult children and aging parents and explained as gently as I could what the law allowed and what it did not. I had been thorough and careful and proud of the work. I had never once thought I would need it myself. I put the legal pad in the bottom drawer of the desk, under the folders from Eleanor's estate, the last place anyone would think to look for something new. Then I closed the drawer and sat for a moment with my hands in my lap and let myself feel the full weight of what I was beginning to understand. Someone was building a case against me. The person building it lived in my house. And she had no idea that the man she was building it against had spent the better part of 4 decades learning exactly how cases like this were won and lost. I looked at the photograph on the desk. Eleanor at 39, laughing in the early morning light, her hand raised to shade her eyes from the sun. I had looked at that photograph every day for 3 years and felt only grief. That morning, for the first time, I felt something else. I felt her watching. The notebook was pale blue, spiral-bound, the kind you find at any drugstore for $2. Vivian kept it on the kitchen counter beside the coffee maker, and she had never once tried to hide it. That I realized later was the point. Something kept in plain sight does not look like a weapon. She called it her care journal. She mentioned it casually in conversations the way people mention grocery lists. I wrote it down in the journal. I keep track of everything in the journal. The journal helps me stay organized. I had assumed it was exactly what it appeared to be. Notes from a daughter managing a complicated household and an aging father. I read it on a Wednesday morning while she was in the shower. I had perhaps 4 minutes. I used all of them. The handwriting was neat, almost formal, nothing like the quick slanted scrawl Vivian used for grocery lists and phone messages. Each entry was dated and structured in the same way: the date, a brief weather notation, then a numbered list of observations. Father appeared disoriented upon waking. Father could not recall previous day's conversation regarding medication schedule. Father became agitated when asked routine questions about finances. Father expressed suspicion without cause. I stood at the counter and read and felt something cold settle in my chest. These were not the notes of a worried daughter. I had written enough declarations and clinical summaries in my career to know what I was looking at. This was a legal document dressed in a spiral notebook. The language was careful and consistent always. Father, never, dad, never, he. Always passive, always measured, always just alarming enough to matter, and just vague enough to defend. It read exactly like the kind of contemporaneous record an attorney would instruct a client to keep before filing a petition for guardianship. I turned to the most recent entries. Father became confused regarding origin of bank correspondence. Father denied memory of scheduling appointment despite confirmation email in sent folder. Father showed signs of selective recall consistent with early cognitive decline. I set the notebook down and pressed my fingers flat against the counter. Every entry was a lie. Not a misinterpretation, not an exaggeration born of genuine concern. A lie written with the precision of someone who understood exactly what those words would mean in front of a judge. I heard the shower turn off. I put the notebook back precisely where I had found it, same angle, same position, and moved to the refrigerator and stood there with the door open, staring at nothing by the time Vivian's footsteps reached the hallway. She came into the kitchen wrapped in her robe, her hair damp, and poured herself a glass of water without looking at me. "Did you take the morning medication?" she asked. "Yes," I said. I had not. I was beginning to wonder what was actually in them. "Good." She picked up her phone and began scrolling. "I'm going out this afternoon. You should stay and it's supposed to rain." I had planned to visit Martin. She looked up. "Dad, you were just complaining about your knee yesterday. I don't think driving is a good idea." I had not complained about my knee. Not yesterday, not recently, not to her. "I'll be fine," I said. She studied me for a moment, with an expression I recognized, evaluating, recalibrating. Then she smiled. "Okay. Just text me when you get there and when you leave." She picked up her notebook from the counter and tucked it under her arm without a second glance and walked out. I stood in the kitchen and listened to her footsteps go upstairs. It was 2 hours later, passing the hallway mirror on my way to the front door, that I stopped. Vivian's bedroom door was slightly open. She was standing at her own mirror, her back partially to me, and she was speaking in a low, even voice. I stood absolutely still. "He's not able to manage his own financial decisions," she said to her reflection. "I've documented repeated episodes of confusion and disorientation. My concern is for his safety and his well-being." She paused, tilted her head slightly, adjusted her expression to something softer. "I love my father. This is the hardest thing I've ever had to do." She said it again. The same words, the same pause, the same tilt of the head. Smoother the second time, more natural. She was rehearsing. I walked to the front door and let myself out quietly, and I sat in my car in the driveway for a full minute before I started the engine. My hands were steady. I was surprised by that. I had expected to feel something sharp and overwhelming, rage perhaps, or grief. What I felt instead was a strange and specific clarity, the kind that used to come over me in the middle of a difficult trial when the shape of the other side's strategy finally became visible. I knew what she was building. I knew exactly how she planned to build it. And for the first time since Eleanor died, I understood that the knowledge in my head, all 38 years of it, was not just professional history. It was the only thing standing between me and losing everything. I pulled out of the driveway and drove to Martin's house, and on the way, I thought about everything I had seen and everything I had not yet done, and by the time I parked in his driveway, I knew one thing with complete certainty. Watching was no longer enough. Martin Reeves had been my closest friend for 41 years, which meant he was one of the few people on earth who did not bother with preamble. He opened the front door before I finished knocking, looked at my face and said, "Come in, I'll make something stronger than coffee." His house was the kind of organized chaos that suited him. Bookshelves that had long since surrendered to the volume of their contents. A desk in the corner, buried under legal journals he still subscribed to. Out of habit, a kitchen that smelled permanently of the black tea he drank by the pot. He had retired 2 years before I did after 40 years as a litigation attorney, and he wore retirement the way some men wear old jackets comfortably without apology. He poured 2 glasses of bourbon and set one in front of me without asking, and sat down across the kitchen table and waited. I told him everything: the email, the calendar, the notebook, the mirror. He did not interrupt once. Martin was one of the finest listeners I had ever known, which was part of what had made him devastating in a courtroom. He let people finish. He let silence do the work that most people rushed to fill with noise. When I was done, he turned his glass slowly on the table and looked at me with an expression I recognized from decades of watching him work. The look that meant he had already run the analysis and was deciding how much of it to say out loud. How long has she been back in the house?" he asked. 8 months. "And the calendar entries go back how far?" 3 months. He nodded slowly. "So she gave herself 5 months to establish presence and trust before she started building the record. That's not impulsive, Edward. That's deliberate." "She's my daughter," I said. The words came out more quietly than I intended. Martin looked at me, not unkindly but without flinching. "I know she is, and I'm going to say something to you now that I need you to hear as your friend, not as someone who's trying to be right. What you're describing, the fabricated notes, the calendar access, the financial appointments made without your knowledge, that is the architecture of a guardianship petition. If she files it and the court accepts her record at face value, you lose the right to manage your own finances. You lose the right to make your own medical decisions. You lose the right to live in your own home on your own terms." I turned my glass on the table the way he had turned his. "I know what a guardianship petition looks like, Martin. I know you do. That's why I'm not explaining the law to you. I'm asking you whether you understand that you are the one it's being filed against." He leaned forward slightly. "Because there's a difference between knowing something professionally and accepting it personally. And right now, I'm looking at a man who still used the phrase, 'she's my daughter,' as though that explains something." The bourbon was warm, and I let it sit on my tongue for a moment before swallowing. "What would you do?" I asked. "I would document everything, contemporaneously with timestamps on a device she does not have access to. I would get an independent medical evaluation of my cognitive status before she could schedule one through her own channels. And I would find out very quickly whether there are financial transactions I don't know about." He paused. "I would also stop taking any medication I hadn't personally verified with my own physician." That last one landed. I thought about the pill I had not taken that morning and said nothing. "There's something else," Martin said. He set his glass down and looked at me directly. "Eleanor's estate documents, the trust she set up before she passed. Do you know who holds the independent copy? No sitio. Richard Hale, her attorney. Have you spoken to Richard recently?" "Not since probate closed." Martin was quiet for a moment. "It might be worth a call." I looked at him. There was something in the way he said it, careful weighted, that told me he knew more than he was offering. Martin had always been precise about what he volunteered and what he waited to be asked. It was a habit of 40 years in litigation, and I knew better than to push it. "You think Eleanor anticipated this?" I said. He didn't answer directly. "I think Eleanor was one of the sharpest people either of us ever knew, and I think she loved you in a way that included knowing your blind spots." He picked up his glass again. "Call Richard, Edward." I drove home in the early evening with the windows down, despite the October cold, because I needed the air and the noise and the particular kind of thinking that only happens when your hands are on a wheel and the road is moving under you. I thought about what Martin had said. I thought about the notebook and the mirror and the email sent at 11:47 while I slept. And I thought about Eleanor the way she used to sit at the kitchen table with her reading glasses pushed up on her head, working through a problem with the quiet intensity of someone who trusted their own judgment completely. She had never been afraid of difficult truths. It was one of the things I had loved most about her, and one of the things that had occasionally driven me to distraction. Call Richard. I pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment before going inside. Through the front window, I could see the light on in the kitchen, Vivian's silhouette moving past it unhurried. She did not know I had gone to see Martin. She did not know what had been said. She did not know that the man she was counting on to stay passive and grateful and easily managed had spent the last 2 hours being reminded very precisely of exactly who he was. I got out of the car and went inside. How was Martin?" she called from the kitchen. Good," I said. "We had a lot to talk about." Vivian told me about the bank appointment over breakfast on Thursday morning as though it were something she had just remembered rather than something she had scheduled from my email account 11 days earlier. "We should leave by 1:15, she said, refilling her coffee without looking up from her phone. "Parking on that block is impossible after 1:30. I looked at her over the rim of my cup. "What exactly are we signing today?" "Just some account management paperwork, updating the signatory information so I can help with transfers and bill payments without having to bother you every time." She set her phone down and smiled at me with the particular patience she reserved for conversations she considered already resolved. "It's purely administrative, Dad, nothing dramatic. I'd like to read the documents before I sign them." "Of course." The smile didn't waver. "That's why we're going in person." We drove to the bank in Vivian's car. She chose the music something soft and instrumental, the kind designed to make you feel calm and slightly drowsy. And she talked the entire way about nothing that mattered. A restaurant she wanted to try, a documentary she had watched, the neighbor's new dog. Her voice was pleasant and unhurried, and I understood that the talking was deliberate, the same way the music was deliberate. She was managing the atmosphere the way she managed everything else carefully in advance, without appearing to manage it at all. Cascade Valley Bank occupied the ground floor of a building on Morrison Street, all polished granite and muted lighting, the kind of interior designed to communicate stability and trustworthiness. Vivian held the door for me and guided me toward the private offices in the back, with a hand at my elbow, light solicitous, the gesture of a devoted daughter helping an unsteady father. I was not unsteady. I had not been unsteady, but I let her keep her hand there. The banker who met us introduced himself as Daniel Brooks. He was perhaps 35, with the careful professional courtesy of someone trained to make difficult conversations feel routine. He shook my hand first, which I noted, and gestured us both toward the chairs across from his desk. "Mr. Calloway," he said, settling into his seat. "Thank you for coming in. I have the documents ready for your review." He slid a folder across the desk toward me. I opened it. There were 4 documents. The first was a standard joint account authorization form, straightforward enough, the kind that added a secondary signatory to an existing account. The second was a durable power of attorney for financial matters, granting Vivian broad authority over my accounts, investments, and real property in the event that I became unable to manage my affairs. The third was a beneficiary update form for my investment portfolio. The fourth was a 1-page summary of account activity that I had not been asked to review or approve. I read all 4 documents completely. Vivian sat beside me with her ankles crossed and her hands folded in her lap, the picture of composed patience. Daniel watched me with the neutral expression of someone waiting to see which way a situation would go. "And this power of attorney?" I said, not looking up from the page. "The language here grants authority under current conditions not only in the event of incapacity. That's a significant distinction." "It's fairly standard language," Vivian said smoothly. "For ease of management." "It's not standard. A springing power of attorney activates upon incapacity. This one is durable and effective immediately, which gives her authority the moment I sign it. This one is effective immediately upon signature." I looked at Daniel. "Is that what was represented to you when this document was prepared?" Daniel's expression shifted. Almost imperceptibly, a slight tightening around the eyes, a fraction of a second, where his professional composure met something that looked very much like discomfort. "The documents were prepared according to the instructions we received," he said carefully. "From whom?" A pause. Beside me, Vivian uncrossed and recrossed her ankles. "The request came through email correspondence," Daniel said, "from your account." I nodded slowly and set the documents back in the folder and closed it. "I see." "Dad!" Vivian's voice was still measured, but something underneath it had sharpened. "This is just about making things easier. You've said yourself that managing everything alone is exhausting." "I don't recall saying that." "You said it in September, after the issue with the investment account." "There was no issue with the investment account. I questioned a fee I didn't recognize, which turned out to be legitimate. That is not an issue that is due diligence." "You were upset for 3 days." "I was thorough for 3 days. I kept my voice even. There's a difference." She leaned forward, slightly lowering her voice in the way people do when they want to create the impression of private reason in a public space. "Dad, please don't make this difficult. Daniel has been very patient. We've already taken up 30 minutes of his time. Let's just finish what we came here to do." I looked at her. She held my gaze with the practiced steadiness of someone who had rehearsed this exact moment I knew, because I had seen her rehearsing. The tilt of the head, the soft concern around the eyes, the implication running just beneath the surface of every word that any resistance on my part was evidence of the very condition she was documenting. It was, I had to admit, exceptionally well done. I looked back at Daniel. He was very still behind his desk, his hands flat on the surface, his eyes moving between Vivian and me with the careful neutrality of someone who understood he was in the middle of something and was not yet sure what. "Daniel," I said, "I'd like a copy of the email correspondence you mentioned, the instructions that came from my account, for my records." Another pause, longer this time. "And I can request that from our records department," he said. "I'd appreciate that." I stood and picked up the folder and handed it back to him. "I'll need a few days to review these documents with my own counsel before signing anything. I hope that's not inconvenient." Vivian stood beside me. The smile was still on her face, but it had gone absolutely rigid the way a smile goes when the muscles holding it are working too hard. "Of course," Daniel said. He was looking at me with something that was no longer neutrality. I could not name it precisely, something between relief and apprehension. The look of a man who had just realized the conversation he thought he was facilitating was not the conversation that was actually happening. We walked to the car in silence. Vivian unlocked it and got in and gripped the steering wheel with both hands before starting the engine. "That was embarrassing," she said quietly. "I don't think so. You made him uncomfortable. I asked reasonable questions about documents I was being asked to sign. I looked out the window at the street. That's not embarrassing. That's what any competent adult would do." She said nothing. The instrumental music came back on when she started the car, the same soft, drowsy soundtrack, and she drove us home without another word. I watched the city move past the window and thought about Daniel's face, the moment of discomfort, the careful phrasing the instructions we received. He knew something was not right. He had known before we walked into that office, and he had said just enough in just the right way to let me know that he knew. I filed that away. I filed everything away, because the man sitting in that passenger seat was not the man Vivian had been counting on, the one who grabbed the railing and forgot his appointments and needed to be managed. That man had never existed. He had been written into existence entry by careful entry in a pale blue spiral notebook. And as of today, he was done being cooperative about it. I heard Marcus's voice before I saw him. He was in the hallway with Vivian, laughing at something she had said, the easy laugh of a man who considered himself at home everywhere he went. I was in the kitchen pouring a glass of water, and I stayed very still for a moment and listened to the two of them, the rhythm of their voices, the particular intimacy of people who share a secret and know it, and find each other's company more comfortable for it. I went upstairs before they reached the kitchen. "Dad," Vivian appeared at the bottom of the stairs. "You're not going to say hello?" I turned on the landing. Marcus stood beside her with a bottle of wine under his arm, and the expression he always wore around me, pleasant slightly, patronizing the face of a man performing respect for an audience he did not particularly respect. "And good evening, Marcus," I said. "Sir," he smiled. "You're looking better. The head healing up, okay." "Fine," I said. "Thank you for asking." I went to my room and closed the door. I read for 2 hours. The sounds from downstairs filtered up in waves, conversation, the occasional sound of glasses. Music kept low enough to seem considerate. At some point after midnight, the house went quiet, and I set my book down and turned off the lamp and lay in the dark with my hands folded on my chest, like a man practicing patience. Sleep came slowly and shallowly, the way it always did, and when it finally arrived, it was thin and easily broken. The clock on my nightstand read 3:14 when I woke. I do not know what woke me: a sound, a shift in the house, the particular alertness of a body that has learned to stay close to the surface of sleep. I sat up too quickly. The room tilted. I put my feet on the floor and stood, and my left foot came down on nothing where the edge of the nightstand rug had folded under itself. And then I was falling before I had time to understand I was falling. My shoulder hit the doorframe. My head caught the corner of the bathroom sink on the way down. The floor came up fast and cold, and I lay still for a moment, listening to the silence of the house, and the high ringing in my left ear, and the specific bright pain radiating from above my temple. When I brought my hand to my head and pulled it away, my fingers were dark. Vivian. My voice was steadier than I expected. I waited. Nothing. Vivian. Louder. The house absorbed the sound and gave nothing back. I pressed my palm flat against the bathroom floor and pushed myself to sitting. The room moved in slow, unhelpful circles. I looked at the door at the gap of dark beneath it and thought with the particular clarity that pain sometimes produces, get to the phone. That was the only task. Get to the phone on the nightstand. It took longer than it should have. I crawled the last part of it, which was not something I had done since I was perhaps 4 years old, and I found it undignified in the specific way that undignified things feel when there is no one watching, not shameful, just honest. Just the plain truth of a body doing what it needed to do to get from one place to another. I reached the nightstand and pulled the phone down and called Vivian's cell. It rang once, twice, 4 times, 6, voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I lay back on the floor with the sheet pulled down from the bed and pressed the corner of it against my head and stared at the ceiling in the dark. From somewhere above me, the room directly overhead Vivian's room, I heard the muffled sound of a voice. Low, unhurried, and then a second voice, quieter, responding. They were awake. I had known in the abstract way you know things you are not yet ready to accept that this moment would come. The moment when there would be no more reasonable explanation available, no stress, no exhaustion, no version of events in which my daughter was simply overwhelmed and needed more patience from me. She had heard the phone. The walls of this house were not thick. I had lived in it for 31 years. I knew exactly what you could hear through them. I lay on the floor of my bedroom, with blood soaking through a bedsheet, and let myself understand fully and without softening it what it meant that my daughter had heard her father calling and had chosen not to answer, not once, not twice, but every time. I did not cry. I did not feel rage. What I felt was quieter than either of those things, and more final, the particular stillness of a door closing somewhere deep inside you, not in anger, but in clarity. Rosa found me at 6:19. She came through the back door, the way she always did, hung her coat in the hallway, and started toward the kitchen. Then she stopped. I had managed to get myself to the top of the stairs sometime around 5, and I was sitting there with my back against the wall and the bedsheet pressed against my head when she looked up and saw me. Her face did what faces do when the mind is processing something faster than the expression can follow, a moment of absolute stillness. And then she was moving up the stairs beside me, her hand on my arm. Edward. Her voice was controlled in the way of someone controlling it deliberately. How long have you been here? A while, I said. I'm all right. You are not all right. She was already on her phone. I'm calling an ambulance. Rosa. I'm calling an ambulance, she said again, in a tone that ended the conversation. Vivian appeared in the hallway below us while Rosa was still on the call. She stood at the bottom of the stairs in her robe, looking up at me at the sheet, at the dried blood on the side of my face, at Rosa sitting beside me on the top step, and her first expression was not horror. It was not relief. It was a rapid involuntary calculation, the look of someone assessing a situation for its implications before they have assessed it for its human content. Dad, she started up the stairs. What happened? Why didn't you call me? I did, I said, several times. She stopped 2 steps below me. Something moved across her face, not guilt. Something more managed than guilt. Something that was already deciding how to frame this. I had my phone on silent, she said. I didn't hear it. I looked at my daughter and said nothing. She looked back at me with the expression she used when a situation required sympathy, and she was assembling the components of it. The softened eyes, the slight furrow of concern, the posture of a woman who had been awake all night, worrying rather than a woman who had been awake all night with her phone on silent 2 floors above her bleeding father. The ambulance is going to be visible from the street, she said quietly. The Hendersons across the road, they notice everything. Rosa stood up from the step beside me slowly and looked at Vivian with an expression I had never seen on her face in 11 years. It was not anger, it was something colder than anger, the look of someone who has been patient for a very long time and has just reached the end of it. She said nothing. She turned back to me and kept her hand on my arm until we heard the sirens outside. On the stretcher moving through the front door, into the pale early morning, I felt the October air on my face and looked up at the sky going gray at the edges and thought about nothing in particular, just the cold and the sky and the specific weight of understanding that had settled into me somewhere between 3:14 and 6:19 on the floor of my bedroom. Rosa leaned down close as they loaded me into the ambulance. I should have told you sooner, she said, her voice just above a whisper. What I have seen in that house, What she is when no one is supposed to be watching." She paused. "You are not the first person she has left alone on that floor. I am so sorry, Edward. I am so sorry I waited this long." The doors closed. I stared at the ceiling of the ambulance and felt the vehicle begin to move, and somewhere in the house behind me, I knew my daughter was already deciding how to explain the morning to the neighbors. They gave me a room on the third floor with a window that looked out over the parking structure, which was not a view anyone would choose, but which I found in the particular exhaustion of that morning oddly calming. Gray concrete, ordered rows, everything exactly where it was supposed to be. The attending physician was a woman named Dr. Farrell, who had the brisk efficiency of someone 12 hours into a shift and still fully present in it. She examined the laceration, ordered the CT scan, told me the results were clean, and said 6 stitches and overnight observation, in a tone that left no room for negotiation. I did not negotiate. I lay back against the pillow and let her work and looked at the ceiling and thought about nothing useful for approximately 40 minutes. Vivian had not come. She had sent a text at 8:53. Rosa said, "You're okay. Rest. I'll come by later if you need anything," and that was the complete extent of it. I read it once. I placed the phone face down on the blanket beside me. I did not read it again. Rosa arrived at 2:15 carrying a container of soup, and the expression of a woman who had made a decision on the drive over and was not going to unmake it. She set the soup on the tray table, pulled the chair close to the bed, and sat down with her hands folded in her lap, and looked at me the way people look at someone when they are about to say something they have been carrying too long. Before I say anything else, she said, "I need you to know that I am ashamed it took me this long. I told myself it wasn't my place. I told myself maybe I was wrong. I told myself a lot of things that were easier than telling you the truth." She paused. "I was wrong to wait. I am sorry." "Tell me now," I said. "That's enough." She nodded once, and then she told me everything. 3 weeks earlier, on a Thursday evening, Rosa had stayed late to finish the laundry. Vivian had not known she was still in the house. Rosa's car was in the shop, and she had taken a bus, which meant there was nothing in the driveway to indicate her presence. She had been folding in the back room off the kitchen when she heard Vivian and Marcus come in through the front door. "They went into your study," Rosa said. "The door wasn't fully closed. I wasn't trying to listen, but I heard my name, and I stopped." "What did they say?" Marcus was talking about timing. He kept saying they were behind schedule, that the window for the filing was narrower than they had planned, because, she paused, choosing her words carefully, because he said if you got your own evaluation, first independently before Vivian filed the petition, the court would weight it differently. He said they needed the petition in before you had a chance to establish a clean record with anyone outside their control. I said nothing. I looked at the window, the parking structure, ordered rows. "Vivian told him 10 days was sufficient," Rosa continued. "She said the bank paperwork would be done by Thursday, the beneficiary forms by the Monday after, and the guardianship petition filed before the end of the month." She looked at me steadily. "She said you wouldn't contest it. Those were her exact words. He won't contest it. He never does. Not with me." The room was very quiet. As she said something else, Rosa said, about the money. About a company she and Marcus had set up. She called it a management structure. She said it had been running for over a year, and that once the guardianship was granted, they could increase the amounts without triggering any review flags. Rosa stopped. She seemed pleased about that part, the way someone sounds when a plan is going better than expected. I had been a lawyer for 38 years. I had explained financial exploitation statutes to families in offices not unlike this hospital room. I had helped clients recover assets taken through exactly this kind of structure, patient incremental, designed to stay beneath the threshold of automatic scrutiny until it had accumulated into something significant. I had testified about it. I had written briefs about it. I had never once sat on this side of the explanation. "Rosa," I said, "the night before last, when I called for Vivian, you said I wasn't the first person she had left alone." She met my eyes without flinching. "No," she said, "you are not. Tell me." She was quiet for a moment. "There was a night in April. You were at Martin's for dinner. I had come back to get something I had forgotten. Vivian didn't know I was there." She paused. "She had a call. I don't know who it was, but I heard her say," another pause, shorter. "She said, the easiest part is that he trusts me completely. That's the whole thing, really. That's all you need." The soup on the tray table had gone cold. Neither of us had touched it. I picked up my phone. Martin answered on the first ring, which meant he had been waiting, which meant Rosa had called him before she had come to me. I was not surprised by that. Rosa had always been more strategically minded than she let on. "I know," he said before I could speak. "She called me this morning. I've been waiting for you to be ready." "I'm ready," I said. "And how are you feeling physically?" "Kiss double. 6 stitches and a clean scan. I'm fine." "Good." His voice shifted into the register I knew from 40 years of watching him work. Not louder, not faster, just more precise. The way a lens sharpens when you find the right focal point. "Then listen to me carefully. You cannot go back to that house tonight. I'll arrange somewhere for you to stay. Tomorrow morning, first thing I need you to call Richard Hale. Don't explain anything over the phone. Just tell him it's time and that you'll come to him." "You know what Eleanor left with him," I said. A pause, brief and weighted. "I've known for 2 years, Edward. She made me promise not to tell you until you needed it rather than just knew about it. She was—" He stopped. "She was very specific about the difference. She said knowing would make you cautious. Needing would make you ready." I looked at Rosa across the small hospital room, at the soup she had brought, at 11 years of loyalty sitting in a plastic chair beside my bed, waiting to see what I would do with what she had given me. "She knew," I said. It was not quite a question. "She saw it coming before either of us did," Martin said quietly. "You know how she was. She didn't panic and she didn't look away. She just started building." Building. I thought about Eleanor at her kitchen table with her reading glasses on, working through something with the focused patience of a woman who trusted her own judgment completely. I thought about March of 2019, 8 months before she passed, when she had told me she had a meeting with Richard about some estate paperwork, and I had barely looked up from my book. I had not asked what the paperwork was. I had not thought to ask. "What do I do first?" I said. "Rest tonight," Martin said. "Actually rest, not plan, not worry, not run the analysis for the 14th time. You're going to need your mind clear. Tomorrow we start, and when we start, we finish it." "All right." "Edward." His voice softened slightly. Not much. Martin was not a man who softened much, but enough to hear it. "She built you something to land on. You just have to trust it enough to use it." I ended the call and set the phone on the blanket and looked at the window for a long time. The parking structure, the ordered rows, the gray November sky just visible at the top of the frame. Rosa stood and picked up the soup container and said she would find the microwave. "Oh, Rosa," I said. She stopped. "Thank you," I said, "for coming to me, for all of it." She looked at me for a moment with an expression I could not entirely read, something between sorrow and the particular relief of a burden finally set down in the right place. "Mrs. Eleanor would not have forgiven me if I hadn't," she said simply. "She went to find the microwave." I lay back against the pillow and looked at the ceiling and thought about a woman who had seen what was coming and had not panicked and had not looked away, who had sat across from a lawyer in March of 2019 and spent 6 weeks building something she hoped her husband would never need and made absolutely certain he would have it if he did. Tomorrow, I thought. Tomorrow we start. Tonight I was going to eat Rosa's soup and sleep in a bed that no one else had access to and let the people who actually loved me do what they had been quietly preparing to do. I closed my eyes. For the first time in a very long time, I felt something that was not vigilance, not grief, not the exhausting work of managing what I knew against what I was willing to admit. I felt held. Martin arranged for me to spend the night at his house, which meant I returned to Mercer Street the following afternoon with 6 stitches above my left temple, a prescribed course of ibuprofen, and a performance to give. The performance was simple. I was the same man I had been yesterday, slightly unsteady, mildly confused, grateful for Vivian's management of things too complicated for me to manage myself. I had played variations of that role for 8 months without knowing I was playing it. The difference now was that I knew the stage I was standing on, and I knew who was in the audience, and I knew exactly what the final act was supposed to look like from where Vivian was sitting. She met me at the door with an expression of carefully calibrated concern, not quite guilty, not quite relieved, landing precisely in the territory of devoted daughter managing a worrying situation. "You should have called me from the hospital," she said, taking my jacket. "I didn't want to bother you," I said. "Rosa stayed with me. It was fine." Something moved across her face at the mention of Rosa. Brief controlled the specific quality of attention, that people give to things they have decided might be a problem. Rosa doesn't need to be running back and forth. That's not what she's paid for. She brought me soup, I said mildly. I thought it was kind. Vivian said nothing more about it. She helped me to the couch, brought me water and my afternoon medication, which I palmed and did not swallow, and told me she had rescheduled the bank appointment for the following week, giving me time to recover. She said it the way you say something to a child. You are trying not to upset with the specific gentleness that is actually a form of management. Thank you, I said. That was thoughtful. I rested that afternoon with my eyes closed and my mind running at full speed. Arthur Pennington had managed my financial accounts for 15 years. He was 68, meticulous to the point of occasional exasperation, and constitutionally incapable of rounding figures. Eleanor had liked him enormously, which was the highest endorsement I knew. He had handled everything from my investment portfolio to the quarterly trust distributions with the steady precision of a man who treated other people's money as though the weight of it was something he felt personally. I had tried to call him twice from the hospital. Both times it had gone to voicemail. That evening, while Vivian was on a call upstairs, I tried again. He picked up on the fourth ring. Edward. His voice was careful in the way that voices get when the person speaking has been rehearsing what to say and has not yet decided which version to use. Arthur, I need to talk to you about the account activity from the past 14 months. A silence. Not the silence of someone thinking, the silence of someone who already knows what is coming and is deciding how to meet it. I've been meaning to reach out, he said finally. Things have been complicated. Tell me. Another pause. Longer. About 6 weeks ago, I received a set of instructions. Written authorization to restructure the quarterly distributions and redirect a portion of the investment income to a new management account. He stopped. The authorization had your signature, Edward, and your letterhead. It looked exactly right. It wasn't for me. I know that now. His voice dropped. I think I knew it then, if I'm honest with myself. The language was slightly off, not wrong enough to flag automatically, but off in the way that things are off when someone has studied the original carefully, but doesn't quite have the feel of it. He exhaled. I should have called you directly to confirm. I didn't. Why not? The silence this time was different, heavier, because 2 days after I received the authorization, Vivian called me. She said you had been having some memory difficulties, that you had been confused about financial matters, that she was helping you manage things going forward, and that if I had any concerns about instructions I received, I should direct them to her rather than bother you. He paused. She was very convincing, Edward. She talked about specific incidents. She had dates. She had the names of your doctors. I kept my voice level. And you believed her? I wanted to believe her, he said quietly. Because the alternative was that I had been handed forged documents and had processed transactions based on them, and that I had a legal and professional obligation to report it, and that the person I was reporting it about was your daughter. Another exhale. I took the easier interpretation. I am not proud of that. I understood. I had been taking the easier interpretation for 8 months. I was not in a position to judge Arthur Pennington for 6 weeks. How much has been redirected? I asked. He told me. The figure was not catastrophic, not yet, but the structure of it was. Small amounts, consistent intervals. A pattern designed to stay beneath the threshold that triggered automatic review. Exactly the kind of accumulation that became significant over time and nearly impossible to dispute once it was established as routine. Arthur, I need you to do something for me. I need you to pull every transaction from the past 14 months and prepare a complete timeline. Every transfer, every authorization, every instruction you received, and from what source. Timestamps, amounts, destination accounts. Everything. A long pause. Edward, if I do that, and if what I'm documenting is what I think it is, I will likely be required to cooperate with an investigation. There will be questions about why I didn't flag this sooner. I know, I said, and I won't ask you to do anything that puts you in an impossible position. But I need you to understand what's at stake. This isn't just about money. There is a guardianship petition being prepared. If it's filed before I can demonstrate a coherent pattern of financial exploitation, the case against me becomes harder to counter. I need your timeline to anchor the evidence. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that I began to think he had made his decision, and it was not the one I needed. Then he said, give me 48 hours. I need it in 7 days. 48 hours, he repeated. and there was something in his voice now that had not been there before, not quite resolve, but the beginning of it, the point where a man stops choosing comfort and starts choosing accuracy. I've been sitting on this for 6 weeks, Edward. If I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it right. Thank you, Arthur. Don't thank me yet. A pause. And Edward, be careful. She called me twice last week asking whether you had been in touch. She wanted to know what we'd discussed. His voice was low now, close to the phone. She's watching the perimeter. Whatever you're planning, assume she's watching. I looked at the ceiling of my study, Eleanor's study, the room with the bay window, and the books in the order she had arranged them. I thought about a woman who had watched perimeters and planned carefully and loved me enough to build a safety net I had not known I was going to need. I know, I said. So am I. I ended the call and sat for a moment in the quiet. From upstairs I could hear Vivian's footsteps moving across the floor above me, back and forth, the rhythm of someone pacing through a problem. 7 days. The clock, as Martin had said, had started. Before I reveal what Edward discovers next, comment ready so I know you're still with me. Because what's coming will change everything you thought you understood about this family. A gentle note: this story contains fictional elements crafted for reflection and entertainment. If that is not for you, no judgment. You are welcome to step away. But if you stay, I promise the next part is worth it. Martin came to the house the next morning at 7:30, which meant he had left his own house before 7, which meant he had not slept much either. I let him in through the back door. Vivian was still upstairs, and I had learned in the past week that the back door, the kitchen, and the study were the 3 spaces in my own home where I had the most reliable privacy. Martin sat at the kitchen table without being invited the way he had done for 40 years and put a folder down in front of him and looked at me with the expression I had come to recognize as his pre-trial face, focused, stripped of everything unnecessary ready. She filed, he said. 2 words. I sat down across from him. When? Yesterday afternoon. A petition for court-ordered capacity evaluation filed in Multnomah County Circuit Court. He opened the folder and turned it toward me. She listed herself as the concerned party. The petition cites documented episodes of confusion, impaired judgment, and inability to manage financial affairs. It references a care journal maintained over the past several months and medical consultations conducted by her on your behalf. I looked at the documents without touching them. My own name in the caption listed as the subject of the petition. In the matter of Edward Calloway, alleged incapacitated person. 38 years of reading documents like this for other people. The language was always the same, careful, clinical, almost kind in its impersonality. It never felt kind to the person it was written about. What's the timeline? I asked. The court has scheduled a preliminary hearing for 10 days from the filing date. If the petition is accepted at the preliminary stage, the judge will order an independent evaluation. If that evaluation supports the petition, he stopped. I lose the right to contest it unilaterally, I said. I become a ward of the court, pending a full guardianship hearing, and the presumption shifts against me. Yes, 10 days. I had known the number from Rose's account of Vivian's conversation with Marcus, but seeing it attached to a court filing date made it different, more specific, more real. Then we have work to do, I said. Martin nodded and turned to the next page. 3 tracks moving simultaneously. We discussed them briefly at the hospital, but I want to go through each one clearly. Go ahead. First track, medical. He tapped the page. You need an independent cognitive evaluation completed and on record before the court-ordered one takes place. Not to preempt theirs, but to establish a baseline from a physician with no connection to Vivian. I've identified someone, Dr. Patricia Webb, neuropsychologist, 17 years of practice, has testified as an expert witness in 6 guardianship cases in this state. She has an opening day after tomorrow. I'll take it. Second track, digital. He turned another page. I have a contact, Connor Reeves, no relation, 34 years old, works in digital forensics. He's done work for 3 law firms I know personally. I need him to look at your devices, your router logs, your email access history. If Vivian and Marcus have been accessing your accounts from their own devices, Connor will find the metadata trail. I thought about the calendar entries, the email sent at 11:47 while I slept. How long will he need? 1 session, 3 to 4 hours. I can bring him here while Vivian is out, or we can do it at my office. Your office, I said without hesitation. Martin made a note. Third track, financial. Arthur's timeline will give us the transaction pattern, but I also need the documentation from Cascade Valley Bank, the email correspondence they received in your name, the instructions for the account restructuring. Daniel Brooks is the banker who handled the appointment. I got the impression from what you told me that he had doubts. He did, I said. He was careful about what he said, but he said enough. I'll reach out to him through proper channels. Martin closed the folder and looked at me directly. All 3 tracks need to be running by tomorrow morning. We have 10 days, and we cannot afford to let any of them stall. Understood. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed a plain white envelope on the table between us. No name on the front, no markings of any kind. Richard Hale asked me to give you this when the time came, Martin said. He said he would know when that was. He paused. He called me last night, Edward. He's been monitoring the court filings. He set up an alert on your name years ago at Eleanor's request. When Vivian's petition appeared in the system yesterday, the alert triggered. I looked at the envelope. Eleanor asked him to hold it until you needed it, rather than just knew about it, Martin continued. Those were her exact words, apparently. She was very clear about the distinction. You said that before, at the hospital. Because she said it twice. She wanted to make sure Richard understood the difference. Martin's voice was quiet. She knew you, Edward. She knew that knowing something and being ready to act on it are 2 entirely different things for you. She knew you would need to reach the point yourself. I picked up the envelope. It was light 1 page, maybe 2 at most. I turned it over in my hands. Not yet, Martin said gently. Call Richard first. He needs to walk you through the trust documents before you read that. The letter will mean more when you understand the full structure of what Eleanor built. I set the envelope down. My hand was steady. I was surprised by that, the same way I had been surprised by it in the bank. The steadiness that comes not from the absence of feeling, but from the presence of something stronger than feeling. Call Richard today, Martin said. He stood and picked up his folder. And Edward, from this point forward, give Vivian nothing. No reactions, no resistance, nothing she can document. Be exactly what she thinks you are. He let himself out through the back door. I sat at the kitchen table with the white envelope in front of me and listened to the house settle around me in the early morning. Quiet, and above me, I heard Vivian's alarm go off. The day had started. Dr. Patricia Webb's office was on the 4th floor of a medical building on Southwest Broadway, the kind of space designed to feel neither clinical nor casual, neutral walls. Good light, 2 chairs angled toward each other across a low table with nothing on it. No desk between us, no barrier of any kind. I had been in enough professional spaces to understand that the arrangement was deliberate. She was 51, compact, and precise in the way of someone who had learned early that clarity was a form of respect. She shook my hand when I came in, looked at me directly, and said, Mr. Calloway, I appreciate you coming in. I want you to know that this evaluation is entirely independent. My findings go into the record as I observe them, nothing more, nothing less. I understand, I said. That's exactly what I need. We had been talking for perhaps 20 minutes, a structured conversation that moved through recent memory, current events. Sequential reasoning, abstract problem solving, when the door opened. Vivian came in without knocking. She was carrying 2 cups of coffee from the place downstairs, and she smiled at Dr. Webb with the particular warmth she deployed for professional encounters, open, apologetic, just slightly breathless, as though she had rushed to be helpful. I'm so sorry to interrupt, she said. I just wanted to make sure Dad had everything he needed. She set one of the cups on the table beside me and looked at Dr. Webb. He didn't sleep well last night. The concussion has been affecting him more than he lets on. Dr. Webb looked at her with an expression that was entirely neutral and entirely attentive. Thank you. We're in the middle of the evaluation. I'll need to continue with just Mr. Calloway for now. Of course. Vivian did not move immediately. She looked at me with the careful concern she had been practicing in mirrors and said, Dad, if you get confused about anything, it's okay to say so. You don't have to push through. I'm not confused about anything, I said. Sometimes you don't realize when... Vivian. My voice was quiet and completely even. Dr. Webb and I are fine. Thank you for the coffee. A beat. The smile stayed in place, but something behind it recalibrated. She looked at Dr. Webb once more, a look that was meant to communicate without words that she was leaving reluctantly, that she was worried that the worry was warranted. Then she left, pulling the door closed behind her. Dr. Webb made a note on her pad. She did not explain what she was writing. She did not need to. Let's continue, she said. You were telling me about your career in estate law. We talked for another 40 minutes. She asked about my professional history, my daily routine, my understanding of my current financial situation and legal circumstances. She asked me to walk her through the events of the past 2 weeks in sequence. I did so with the precision of someone who had been building a mental timeline for days. And I watched her face as I spoke, not for approval, but for information the way I had always watched juries. What I saw was a doctor who had heard a great many stories and knew how to listen for the ones that held together under their own weight. Near the end of the session, she set her notepad down and looked at me with the directness I had come to associate with her in the space of a single hour. "Mr. Calloway, I want to ask you something outside the formal structure of the evaluation. You don't have to answer, but I think it may be relevant to what I document." She paused. "Your daughter, how long has she been managing your appointments, your communications, your interactions with medical and financial professionals?" "Approximately 8 months," I said. "And in that time, has she been present at most of those interactions?" "All of them until today." She nodded slowly. She picked up her notepad again and wrote something I could not read from where I was sitting. "I'm going to be direct with you because I think you prefer that. You are cognitively intact. Your recall is precise, your reasoning is sequential and appropriate, your judgment is sound. There is nothing in this evaluation that supports a finding of incapacity." She met my eyes. "I will also note in my report, as a matter of clinical observation, that the behavior I observed from your daughter during this session, the unsolicited entry, the preemptive framing of your responses, the attempt to position herself as a necessary intermediary, is consistent with a pattern I have documented in other guardianship cases involving undue influence." I said nothing for a moment. "Will that observation carry weight in court?" "It will carry the weight of a documented professional observation from an independent evaluator," she said, "which is not nothing." I thanked her and stood to leave. She shook my hand again at the door, the same firm, direct grip as when I arrived, and said, "Mr. Calloway, whatever is happening in your household, you are not imagining it. I want you to know that clearly." "I know," I said, "but it helps to hear it." Vivian was waiting in the hallway outside, sitting in one of the chairs along the wall, with her phone in her lap, her posture arranged into something that read as patient and worried in equal measure. When she saw me, she stood immediately and searched my face with the practiced efficiency of someone looking for information. "How did it go?" she asked. Fine," I said. "She's very thorough." "What did you talk about?" "The evaluation." I pressed the button for the elevator. She asked good questions. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, the one I had seen after the bank appointment, the one that had gone rigid around the edges. Standing in the hallway under the fluorescent light, I looked at my daughter's face and felt the particular chill of recognizing something you cannot unknow. She had already decided the evaluation would go her way. She had no idea it had not. Martin's office occupied the second floor of a narrow brownstone on Yamhill Street that he had rented for 40 years and refused to give up after retirement on the grounds that a man needed somewhere to think that was not his kitchen. The space had the particular quality of rooms that are used for serious work. Not tidy, not impressive, but absolutely functional. Every surface covered with something that had a reason to be there. Connor Reeves was already set up when I arrived. He was 34, lean and unhurried in the way of someone whose work required patience rather than speed, with the specific kind of focus that does not bother with small talk because small talk costs attention. He shook my hand, looked at the laptop and phone I had brought, and said, "Let's start with the router logs. Everything else follows from those." Martin sat in the corner with his tea and did not interfere. Connor worked the way surgeons work, quietly, methodically, narrating what he was doing in the measured tone of someone who has learned that clients understand more than they are given credit for and deserve to be kept informed. He had brought his own equipment, a slim black case that opened into a workstation I did not entirely recognize, and he moved between my devices and his own with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. "Your router logs every device that connects to your network," he said, without looking up from the screen. "IP addresses, timestamps, duration of connection. If someone accessed your accounts from inside this house using a device other than yours, it will be here." "And if they used a VPN to mask the address?" I asked. He glanced up. "VPNs mask the destination, not the origin point on a local network. From inside your house connecting to your router, the device ID is still logged. You'd need a separate physical network to avoid that, which would mean a second router or a cellular connection. He paused. Did your daughter or anyone in the house have a separate hotspot device? I thought about Marcus. Possibly. Then we look at both. He turned back to the screen. Give me 20 minutes. I sat across the table from Martin and did not speak. There are certain kinds of waiting that require silence, the kind where the outcome is already determined, and speaking about it would only make the time pass more slowly. Martin understood this. He drank his tea and read something on his phone and left me to my thoughts. 17 minutes later, Connor said, Okay, want jag says it do lite berättsförsörjning. He turned his laptop toward me. The screen showed a network access log columns of timestamps, device identifiers, and IP addresses. Connor had highlighted 3 rows in yellow and 1 in red. These 3, he said, pointing to the yellow rows, are access events to your Google account from a device registered to this network that is not your laptop or your phone. The device ID corresponds to a MacBook Air, not yours. The access timestamps are 11:41 p.m., 11:44 p.m., and 11:52 p.m. on October the 9th. October the 9th, the night the email to the bank had been sent. And the red one? I asked. That's different. He zoomed in on the highlighted row. This is an access event to your cloud storage drive, the one synced to your calendar and documents. The timestamp is September the 4th, 8:17 p.m. Duration of access 3 hours and 51 minutes. He looked at me. Nearly 4 hours on your drive in a single session. I looked at the date, September the 4th. That's when the calendar entries were added. That's what I would expect, yes. He pulled up a second window. Now the care journal. You said it was a Word document that your daughter kept on her own device. Did she ever save anything to your shared drive? She had access to it. She said she needed it to manage my appointments. Connor nodded and opened a file. I found a copy of the document in your drive's version. History, it was uploaded and synced on the same night as the calendar access, September 4th. The upload timestamp is 8:23 p.m. He turned the laptop further toward me. Here's what's interesting. He opened the document's revision history, a feature that recorded every edit, every addition, every deletion, with timestamps attached to each change. The document had been created at 8:23 p.m. on September the 4th, and last, edited at 12:11 a.m. on September the 5th. In between those two timestamps, there were 214 individual edits. 214 revisions. Connor said, in approximately 3 hours and 48 minutes. The entries in this document cover a period of 11 months. 11 months of daily observations revised and finalized in a single evening. He let that sit for a moment. This is not a journal. Someone sat down on one night and wrote a year's worth of fabricated records. The room was very quiet. Martin set down his tea. I looked at the revision history on the screen, the timestamps cascading down the page, each one a few minutes apart, each one representing another entry written or adjusted or refined. I thought about Vivian at her kitchen table, or at her desk, or wherever she had sat that September evening, working through 11 months of a life that had not happened, constructing it entry by entry, with the patience and precision of someone who understood exactly what she was building and exactly what it was for. Can you certify this? I asked Connor. As evidence. Can you produce documentation of these logs and this revision history in a form that would be admissible, certified forensic report chain of custody documentation, expert witness testimony if required? He closed his laptop with the quiet finality of someone completing a job. Yes. I looked at Martin. Martin looked back at me with the expression he used when a case had just turned, not satisfaction, exactly something more serious than that. The look of a man who understood the weight of what had just shifted. At 2 tracks down, he said quietly. 1 to go. Rosa called me at 6:15 the following evening. I was in Martin's kitchen going through Arthur's preliminary figures with a legal pad and a pen, the way I had always worked through problems that required the kind of thinking that a screen could not contain. Martin was on his own phone in the next room, and the house had the particular focused quiet of a place where serious work was being done. I need to tell you something, Rosa said. She kept her voice low, which told me she was still in the house on Mercer Street, which told me she had stayed after hours for a reason. They argued tonight, Vivian and Marcus. I heard most of it. I set down my pen. Tell me. Marcus came by around 5. They were in the living room. I was in the laundry room at the end of the hall with the door open. At first they were talking quietly, but it escalated. She paused. He's scared, Edward. Whatever he's been telling himself about this, he's stopped believing it. What did he say? Rosa was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that meant she was making sure she had the words right. He said he had looked up the statutes. He said what they had done with the management company, and the transfers was not, and I'm using his word, was not cleanly structured. He said if the guardianship petition got contested, the financial trail would come out and the trail went directly through him. I said nothing. I let her continue. Vivian told him he was overreacting. She said the petition was going to go through without a contest, because you wouldn't fight it. She said, another pause. She said you never had before, that you would find a way to forgive her the way you always did, and by the time you understood what had happened, it would already be settled. The legal pad in front of me had a column of figures running down the left side, Arthur's careful notations in the margins. I looked at them without seeing them. What did Marcus say to that? I asked. He said she was underestimating you. Rosa's voice was careful. He said he had been watching you for 3 months and that you were not. He said, that man is not what you've been telling me he is. He said something had changed in the past week, and he could feel it. Marcus, it turned out, was more perceptive than I had given him credit for. Then Vivian got angry. Rosa continued, not loud, angry, cold, angry, the kind she gets when someone isn't cooperating. She said Marcus had already signed the company documents and processed the transfers, and that he didn't get to change his mind about his level of involvement because it was inconvenient. She said, Rosa stopped. Go ahead. She said, you are in this exactly as deep as I am. The only difference is that I'm not losing my nerve. And then she said he had 3 days left to finish what he'd started, or she would make sure any investigation pointed at him first. I picked up my pen again, not to write anything, just to have something in my hand. Rosa, I said. After that, what did Marcus do? He left, she said. But before he walked out, when Vivian had gone into the kitchen, I saw him. He was standing in the hallway with his phone. He was scrolling through something, photographs maybe, or messages. He was reading carefully the way you read something you're deciding whether to keep. She paused. He looked like a man making a calculation. I thanked her and ended the call and sat for a moment with the information settling into the shape of what it meant. Marcus was the variable I had not been certain about. A man who had walked into a scheme with the confidence of someone who had done this kind of thing before, or believed he had, and was now discovering that confidence had been misplaced. The moment a co-conspirator starts calculating their own exposure, the architecture of the scheme begins to crack, not from the outside, but from within. I had watched it happen in litigation more times than I could count. It was one of the most reliable dynamics in law. Martin appeared in the doorway. I told him what Rosa had said. He listened without interrupting, which was his way, and when I finished, he sat down across the table and was quiet for a moment. He'll keep the messages, Martin said. Whatever he has, texts, emails, financial instructions, he'll keep them as leverage. That's the rational move for someone in his position. He can't undo his involvement, so he makes himself useful to whichever side looks stronger. Which means if we can demonstrate the evidence is against Vivian, he flips. He's already halfway there. Rosa's description of him in that hallway, that's a man who's already decided. He's just waiting to see which way is safer to fall. Martin paused. There's something else. He reached into the folder on the table and slid a single sheet toward me. Daniel Brooks called me this afternoon. He said he had been reviewing the correspondence file from your account, and that there were, and I'm quoting him, several inconsistencies in the metadata of the email submissions that concern him professionally. He wants to meet. I looked at the sheet. Martin had written Daniel's direct number and the time of the call. He's not going to wait for a subpoena, I said. No, he's a careful man who got handed something careless and has been sitting with the discomfort of it for 2 weeks. He wants to get ahead of it. Martin folded his hands on the table. I'll arrange the meeting for tomorrow. With his records and Arthur's timeline running in parallel, we'll have the full financial picture before the end of the week. I nodded and looked back at the legal pad. The column of figures, Arthur's careful notations, 14 months of small, steady withdrawals that had seemed like nothing individually and added up to something very specific when you laid them end to end. The structure of it was almost elegant in the cold way that well-designed deceptions are sometimes elegant, efficient, patient, built to last. But the thing about elegant structures I had learned in 38 years was that they required every element to hold. Remove one piece, and the whole thing showed its seams. Marcus was loosening. Daniel had already decided. Arthur was 48 hours from delivering a timeline that would anchor everything else to dates and amounts that could not be argued with. 3 days, Vivian had told Marcus. She had meant it as a deadline for him. It was also, without her knowing it, a deadline for her. I picked up the phone and called Rosa back. "One more thing," I said when she answered. "Whatever happens in the next 3 days, if anyone in that house asks you anything, you don't know where I am. You don't know what I've been doing. You don't know who I've been speaking to." "I know," she said simply. "And Rosa, thank you for all of it." A brief silence. "Mrs. Eleanor would have wanted someone watching out for you," she said. "I should have started sooner." I put the phone down and went back to the figures on the legal pad, and outside Martin's window, the city went about its evening, and somewhere across town in a house on Mercer Street, a very confident woman was running out of time without knowing it. I opened the envelope at 11 o'clock that night. Martin had gone to bed an hour earlier, leaving me at the kitchen table with the folder of Arthur's figures, and the quiet of a house that belonged to someone who slept without difficulty and did not apologize for it. The envelope had been in my jacket pocket for 2 days. I had moved it from jacket to jacket. As I changed clothes, the way you carry something you are not ready to put down, but are not yet ready to open. I sat alone at the table and looked at it for a long moment. Then I picked it up and ran my thumb along the seal. Inside was a single card. Richard Hale's professional card with a handwritten number on the back, not his office line, a cell number I did not recognize. Below the number in Richard's careful handwriting, "When you're ready. Any time." I looked at the clock, 11:04. I called the number. He answered on the second ring, which told me he had been expecting the call, if not tonight, then soon. "Edward?" His voice was unhurried, the voice of a man who had been holding something in trust for a long time and was finally being asked to put it down. "Richard," I said, "tell me what Eleanor built." A brief pause, not hesitation, more like the pause of someone choosing where to begin a story that has more than one possible starting point. "Eleanor came to me in March of 2019, he said. 8 months before she passed, she had received her prognosis and she had decided in the way Eleanor decided things, which is to say completely and without ambiguity that she was going to spend whatever time she had making sure you were protected after she was gone." He paused. "She was very specific about what she was protecting you from. She did not use Vivian's name directly in our first meeting. She said she was concerned about what happened to vulnerable people when the people around them had more access than accountability." I said nothing. I looked at the card in my hand. "We met 4 times over 6 weeks, Richard continued. "She came alone each time. She had done significant research. She understood the mechanics of guardianship law, of financial power, of attorney, of the specific ways that estate documents could be manipulated after the fact. She asked excellent questions, better than most attorneys I work with." A brief pause. "She loved you very much, Edward, but she also knew you. She knew that your instinct when someone you loved caused you pain was to find a reason to forgive rather than a reason to act. She called it your greatest strength and your most exploitable quality." The kitchen was very quiet. "What did she build?" I asked. "A revocable living trust," Richard said. "Standard in structure with one significant addition. Eleanor drafted with my assistance what I call a protective clause. The language specifies that any beneficiary who during the grantor's lifetime engages in or facilitates any of the following actions forfeits all rights under the trust, permanently and irrevocably." He paused. "The actions listed include petitioning for guardianship without documented independent medical evidence of incapacity accessing or redirecting the grantor's financial accounts without explicit written consent, fabricating or causing to be fabricated, any document intended to misrepresent the grantor's cognitive or physical condition and exerting undue influence over the grantor's legal or medical decisions." I set the card down on the table. "She anticipated every element of this?" I said. "Yes," Richard said quietly. "She did." I sat with that for a moment. Eleanor at her kitchen table with her reading glasses pushed up on her head, working through the specific language of a legal document designed to protect me from a future she could see coming, and I could not. Working through it 8 months before she died, when she had other things harder, things to think about. "The clause has already been triggered," Richard said. "The guardianship petition Vivian filed is by itself sufficient to activate it because it was filed without independent medical evidence of incapacity. Dr. Webb's evaluation, which I understand was completed 2 days ago, establishes that evidence does not exist. The petition is therefore a triggering event under the trust language. When can you present the trust? I asked. Whenever you need me to, he said. I have been ready for 2 years. A silence settled between us, the kind that is not uncomfortable but has weight. Then Richard said, there is one more thing. Eleanor left a letter with me, not part of the trust documents, separate, personal. He paused. She asked me to give it to you when you were ready to receive it rather than simply read it. She was very clear about the distinction. Martin said the same thing. She told Martin the same thing, yes. She was thorough. A brief pause. Are you ready, Edward? Not for what's coming in the next few days. I think you've been ready for that for some time. I mean, ready for what she wanted to say to you. I looked at the empty chair across the table, Eleanor's chair in Martin's kitchen. She had sat in it dozens of times over 40 years, arguing with Martin about film adaptations of novels she considered unimpeachable, drinking his tea and pronouncing it inferior to her own, laughing the particular laugh she had when she found something genuinely funny rather than merely polite. The chair was empty. It had been empty for 3 years. Not yet, I said. Let me finish what needs finishing first. Then I'll be ready. She would understand that, Richard said, and there was something in his voice, warmth, or something close to it, that told me he had known Eleanor well enough to know that was true. I'll see you when it's time, Edward. You know where I am. I ended the call and sat at the table for a long time after, with the card in front of me and the empty chair across from me, and the specific clarifying weight of understanding that the woman I had lost had never stopped looking after me, not even at the end. Not even from the other side of it. Vivian changed the Wi-Fi password on a Tuesday morning without telling me. I discovered it when my phone lost its connection and I went to the settings to reconnect. The network was there, the same name, the same signal. But my saved password no longer worked. I went downstairs and found Vivian in the kitchen with her laptop open, and I asked her about it, with the mild confusion of a man who finds technology unpredictable and slightly beneath his dignity. Oh, I updated it for security, she said without looking up. I'll write it down for you. She wrote a 12-character string on a Post-it note and slid it across the counter without making eye contact. I thanked her and went back upstairs and connected my phone and then immediately forwarded the new password to Martin because the point was not the password. The point was that she was narrowing the perimeter, cutting the lines one by one in ways that looked like maintenance rather than strategy. 2 days before the preliminary hearing. That afternoon she knocked on the door of my study. She had started knocking again, which was its own kind of signal. The performance of respect deployed when the performance of concern was no longer sufficient and came in, carrying a thin folder. I need you to look at something, she said. She set the folder on the desk in front of me and opened it. Inside were 3 documents. These are the final authorizations. The account transfers the beneficiary update and the co-signatory confirmation for the property management agreement. She sat down across from me, the way she sat across from contractors and service providers, with the folder between us, like an agenda. The hearing is in 2 days. The judge will want to see that we've been proactive about putting management structures in place. It looks better if these are already filed. I picked up the first document and held it at the angle of a man whose vision is not quite what it was. This is a lot of language, I said. It's standard language. I've been through it all. I turned the page slowly. What's this section here, the one about the management fee structure? A brief pause. That's just the compensation arrangement for the oversight services, standard for this kind of agreement. Who is being compensated? The management entity. It's a LLC Marcus, and I set up to handle the administrative side of things. It keeps everything organized and properly documented for tax purposes. I nodded slowly as though this was settling into place with some difficulty. And these fees come from my accounts. From the investment income, a small percentage. It's very reasonable, Dad. She leaned forward slightly. I know it looks complicated on paper. That's why I'm here to walk you through it. You don't have to understand every line, you just need to sign where I've marked. I looked at the little yellow tabs she had placed at the signature lines. 6 of them. Neat, precise, the tabs of someone who had done this before, or had planned it carefully enough that it amounted to the same thing. And I'd like to read it myself, I said. All of it. Of course. She sat back, patient, composed. Take your time. I read slowly. I turned each page with the deliberate care of a man working through unfamiliar material, pausing at sections, running my finger along lines as though tracking them required effort. In the margins of my mind, I noted every clause, the management fee structure, drawing 12% of quarterly distributions, the co-signatory requirement that would effectively give Vivian veto, power over any account transaction above $500, the beneficiary amendment that redirected the primary disbursement of my estate to a holding entity rather than any named individual. It was thorough work. I gave her that. After 20 minutes, I set the documents down and picked up the pen she had placed beside the folder. My hand moved toward the first signature tab, and then I stopped. "I'm sorry," I said. "My hand is shaking a little." I set the pen down and flexed my fingers slowly. "The concussion, I think. Some days are better than others." Vivian watched my hand. "It's okay. Take your time. Maybe some water." She got up and went to the small table by the window where I kept a pitcher, and I looked at the door of the study. Through the gap at the bottom, I could see the shadow of feet in the hallway. 2 pairs standing still, Martin and Richard. They had arrived 40 minutes ago through the back door and had been waiting in the hallway since, waiting for the right moment, waiting for me to give them the signal. Vivian turned back from the window with the glass of water, and as she crossed the room, I looked at her, at my daughter, at the folder on my desk, at the 6 yellow tabs marking the places where my signature was supposed to complete something she had been building for 14 months, and I felt the last of the softness go out of me. Not in anger, in clarity. "And thank you," I said. I took the water and set it on the desk without drinking it. Then I put the pen down flat and looked at her directly. "Vivian," my voice was quiet, completely steady. "Before I sign anything, there's something I need to show you." She went very still. "I've asked a couple of people to join us," I said. "I hope that's all right." I looked at the door and said clearly, "Come in." The door opened. Martin first, then Richard, with a leather portfolio under his arm and the expression of a man who had been waiting 2 years for this exact moment and had not rushed it. Vivian's eyes moved from Martin to Richard to me, and for the first time since she had come back to this house 8 months ago, I watched something move across my daughter's face that was not calculated. It was surprise, pure, unmanaged, unperformed surprise. I looked at her and said quietly, "Do you want to know why I haven't signed anything?" Vivian did not answer my question. She looked at Martin, then at Richard, then back at me, and I watched her run the calculation behind her eyes, the same rapid, controlled assessment I had seen her make a dozen times in the past 8 months, whenever a situation required a new approach. She was looking for the angle, the reframe, the version of this moment that she could manage. "I don't know who called these people here," she said, "but I think we should finish this conversation privately, as a family." "This is as private as it's going to get," Martin said. He did not sit down. He stood near the door with his hands in his pockets, and his voice had the quality it got in courtrooms, not loud, not aggressive, simply immovable. "Sit down, Vivian." She sat, not because she wanted to, because the room had shifted in a way that left her no better option. Richard placed his leather portfolio on the desk and opened it without hurry. "My name is Richard Hale," he said. "I was Eleanor Calloway's attorney of record from 2018 until her passing. I currently hold the original executed copy of a revocable living trust established by Eleanor Calloway in March of 2019, naming Edward Calloway as the primary beneficiary and trustee." He removed a document and set it on the desk beside Vivian's folder. "I also hold a certified copy of the Protective Clause Amendment executed simultaneously, which I will now read aloud for the record." "There is no record," Vivian said. "This isn't a legal proceeding." "Not yet," Richard said and read the clause. He read it the way attorneys read documents that matter slowly, precisely every word given its full weight. I watched Vivian's face as she heard it. The language about petitioning for guardianship without independent medical evidence. The language about accessing or redirecting financial accounts without explicit written consent. The language about fabricating documents intended to misrepresent the grantor's cognitive condition. By the time Richard reached the forfeiture provision, Vivian's expression had gone to something I had not seen on her face before. Not guilt, not remorse. A cold, contained fury at being outmaneuvered. "And this document has no bearing on the current petition," she said. "Dr. Webb's evaluation completed 4 days ago establishes that no independent medical evidence of incapacity exists," Richard replied. "The petition filed in Multnomah County Circuit Court is therefore a triggering event under Clause 7 of the amendment. The forfeiture provision activates automatically upon filing. It does not require a separate proceeding." Before Vivian could respond, the study door opened and Connor came in carrying his laptop. He set it on the corner of the desk and turned the screen outward so that everyone in the room could see it. Connor Reeves, Martin said. Digital forensics. Connor did not introduce himself further. He pulled up the router log and the revision history side by side and said in the same unhurried tone he had used in Martin's office, "The device that accessed Mr. Calloway's email account on the night of October 9th is registered to this network under the name Vivian's MacBook. The access lasted 11 minutes. During that time, one outgoing email was composed and sent the appointment request to Cascade Valley Bank." He scrolled down. The Care Journal, maintained as a contemporaneous record of Mr. Calloway's alleged incapacity, was uploaded to his cloud drive on September 4th and revised 214 times in a single session lasting 3 hours and 48 minutes. It was not written over months. It was written in one evening. The room was very quiet. Then Arthur walked in. He had called me that morning to say he was ready, and I had told him to come at 2 o'clock, and it was 2:03. He looked tired in the way of someone who had not slept well for 6 weeks and had finally decided that the discomfort of honesty was preferable to the weight of the alternative. He set a bound document on the desk, 42 pages tabbed and indexed, 14 months of transactions laid out in chronological order, with source accounts, destination, accounts amounts, and timestamps. "Every withdrawal," he said. "Every transfer to the management LLC, flagged against the dates in the Care Journal when Mr. Calloway was documented as being kept at home." He looked at Vivian directly for the first time. "The correlation is not coincidental. On 11 of the 14 transfer dates, the journal records that Mr. Calloway was, quote, too disoriented to manage routine tasks. On those same 11 dates, transfers ranging from $4,000 to $18,000 were processed from his accounts." Vivian stood up. "This is a setup," she said. Her voice was no longer measured. It had lost the practiced warmth, the calibrated concern, all of the performance she had been maintaining for 8 months. What was underneath it was not grief and not remorse. It was anger, cold and specific and directed entirely at the fact of being seen. "You got to these people before I could finish. You've been planning this for weeks while pretending to be." She stopped, looked at me. "You let me think you didn't know." "Yes," I said. "That's manipulative." "Yes," I said again. "It is. I learned from someone." Her jaw tightened. She looked around the room at Martin, at Richard, at Connor, at Arthur, and I watched her look for the exit that was not there. "I want a lawyer," she said. "That's a good idea," Martin said. She looked at me one last time, and I looked back at my daughter, at the face I had known for 38 years, the face I had loved without condition and defended without cause and believed in long past, the point where belief was warranted, and I waited for something. Regret, recognition, anything that resembled the person I had been holding on to in my mind. What I saw was resentment, nothing more. Then the doorbell rang. Martin opened the front door. Detective Sarah Okafor stepped into the hallway with the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who walk into complicated rooms for a living and have learned not to add to the noise. She was 43 compact and composed with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a notepad already open in her hand. Behind her stood a uniformed officer whose name I did not catch and would not need. She looked at me first. "Mr. Calloway." "Detective," I said. "Thank you for coming." She nodded once and moved into the study, taking in the room, the documents on the desk, the people standing around it. Vivian still on her feet near the window, with the efficient attention of someone cataloging a scene. Then she looked at Vivian. "Ms. Calloway," she said. "I'm Detective Sarah Okafor with the Portland Police Bureau Financial Crimes Unit. I have a warrant to collect documentary evidence, and I need to inform you of the following." She opened her notepad and read without inflection, because inflection was not the point, clarity was. "You are the named subject of a criminal complaint filed this morning by the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office. The complaint alleges 3 counts of first-degree forgery, 2 counts of financial exploitation of a vulnerable person, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit financial exploitation, forgery, and elder abuse." She looked up. "Do you understand what I've just said?" Vivian said nothing. "I'll take that as a yes," Detective Okafor said. She turned to Richard. "Counselor, I'll need copies of the trust documentation and the protective clause amendment for the evidentiary record." "Already prepared," Richard said, and produced a second set of documents from his portfolio. I want to take a moment to explain what those charges meant in plain language, because I had spent my career explaining exactly this to families in rooms not unlike mine, and I understood that the words meant more when you understood what they contained. First-degree forgery in Oregon meant creating or possessing a written instrument, a document, a signature, an official record with the intent to defraud. Each of the 3 counts corresponded to a specific document, the email sent from my account to the bank. The fabricated calendar entries establishing a false record of incapacity and the care journal created in a single evening and presented as a contemporaneous record. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable person meant knowingly obtaining or using the funds of a person 65 or older through deception, intimidation, or undue influence. Oregon statute classified this as a felony when the amount exceeded $1,000. Arthur's timeline documented 14 months of transfers. The total exceeded $1,000 by a considerable margin. The conspiracy count encompassed Marcus. As if on cue, Detective Okafor's phone buzzed. She looked at it briefly and said, "Marcus Hale is outside. He's agreed to come in voluntarily." Marcus came through the front door, looking like a man who had made a decision he was not proud of, and had decided that not being proud of it was preferable to the alternative. He was carrying a phone in one hand and a printed document in the other. And he did not look at Vivian when he came into the study. He looked at Detective Okafor. "I have the message history," he said. "Everything from the past 14 months. The instructions for setting up the LLC, the transfer authorizations, the communications about the guardianship timeline." He set the printed document on the desk beside Arthur's timeline. "I also have the name and account details of the notary who processed 2 of the documents. He was paid directly by Vivian. I have the payment record." Vivian looked at Marcus then. The look she gave him was not betrayal. Betrayal implies expectation. And I suspected Vivian had anticipated this possibility from the moment she had threatened him 3 days ago. What the look contained was contempt, pure and efficient. Marcus did not flinch. He had made his calculation, and he was living with it. Detective Okafor spent the next 40 minutes working through the room, methodically collecting documents, taking brief statements, instructing Connor to prepare the forensic files for evidentiary transfer. Daniel Brooks arrived at 3:30 with a folder from the bank's records department containing the email correspondence the metadata flags their internal system had generated but not acted on, and a signed statement detailing the circumstances under which he had processed the account restructuring documents. "I should have called Mr. Calloway directly to confirm the instructions," Daniel said. He was looking at me rather than the detective. "I knew something was off. I didn't act on it. I'm sorry." "Your statement is what matters now," Detective Okafor said, not unkindly. At 4:15, she closed her notepad and looked at Vivian, who had remained standing near the window. Through all of it, her arms crossed, her expression settled into the particular blankness of someone who has decided that showing nothing is the last form of control available to them. Ms. Calloway, is it Boris?" Detective Okafor said, "I need you to come with me." Vivian uncrossed her arms. She picked up her phone from the desk, the officer stepped forward, and she put it back down without being told twice. She straightened her jacket. She was, to the last, composed in the outward way she had always been. Composed the performance of control, maintained even when control was gone, because it was the only performance she knew. She walked to the door of the study, and then she stopped, and she turned. And she looked at me across the room, across the desk, covered in documents, across 38 years, across everything. She did not speak. Neither did I. There was nothing left to say that the room had not already said more clearly than either of us could. The officer placed a hand at her elbow gently and guided her into the hallway. I listened to her footsteps cross the floor, heard the front door open, heard it close. The study was very quiet. Martin put his hand on my shoulder. He did not say anything. He did not need to. The study emptied slowly. Connor packed his equipment with the same quiet efficiency he had brought into the room, shook my hand at the door, and left without ceremony. Richard stayed long enough to confirm that the trust documents had been transferred to the evidentiary record and that he would file the forfeiture notification with the court by end of business. Daniel had already gone, leaving behind the folder from the bank and the particular relief of a man who had finally put something down that had been too heavy to carry quietly. Martin went to the kitchen to make tea, which was his response to most things that required something to do with his hands. That left Arthur Rosa and Detective Okafor. Detective Okafor had pulled a chair to the side of the desk and opened her notepad again. the unhurried posture of someone who understood that the formal part of the afternoon was finished and the real part was only now beginning. She looked at Arthur. "Mr. Pennington," she said, "I'd like to go through the timeline." Arthur opened his bound document to the first tabbed section and set it flat on the desk between them. 42 pages. He had organized it the way he organized everything by date, cross-referenced with a summary column on the right side of each page that translated the raw figures into plain language. He walked through it methodically. The first transfer had occurred on September the 2nd of the previous year, 11 days after Vivian moved into the house on Mercer Street. The amount was $4,200 redirected from my quarterly investment distribution to the Management LLC account. It had been processed on the basis of a written authorization bearing my signature and my letterhead. The authorization was sent by email from Mr. Calloway's account, Arthur said. I have since compared the language and formatting to Mr. Calloway's actual correspondence from that period. There are 3 consistent differences: the salutation format, the closing phrase, and the placement of the reference line. Individually, each difference is minor. Together, they establish a pattern that distinguishes the fabricated documents from the genuine ones. Detective Okafor wrote without looking up. Total amount redirected over the 14-month period. Arthur turned to the summary page at the back. $214,600. The room was quiet for a moment. I had known the figure from Arthur's preliminary work, but hearing it spoken aloud in the context of a formal statement gave it a different weight. It was not a catastrophic sum, not the entirety of what I had built over 38 years, but it was 14 months of patient calculated theft from a man who had trusted his daughter to be in his house. "Mr. Calloway," Detective Okafor said, turning to me, "is there anything you want to add to Mr. Pennington's account before I move on?" "No," I said. "Arthur's documentation is complete." She nodded and looked at Rosa, who had been sitting in the chair by the window with her hands folded and the expression of someone who had decided that what she knew was no longer something she was willing to keep to herself. "Mrs. Delgado," Detective Okafor said, "you were employed in the household. Can you describe what you observed?" Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The first thing I want to say is that she was very good at it. If you only saw what she wanted you to see, you would have believed every word she said. She was patient. She was consistent. She never slipped in front of company." She paused. Then she told 2 stories. The first was from a Sunday morning in February 7 months earlier. Rosa had arrived early to prepare the house for a family lunch. She had come through the back door and found Edward's coffee cup on the floor of the kitchen, dropped, not thrown, the kind of thing that happens when your hands are unsteady. Vivian had been standing at the counter. She had not picked it up. She had looked at it and said to no one in particular, "I should photograph that. It's good documentation." The second was from a Thursday evening in June. Rosa had been leaving for the night when she heard Edward in the study on the phone with an old colleague from his practice. He had been laughing the real laugh, the one Rosa knew from 11 years of working in that house, the one that meant he was genuinely at ease. Vivian had appeared in the hallway, listened for a moment, and then gone into the study and told the caller that her father needed to rest. She had ended the call on his behalf and taken the phone with her when she left the room. The detective's pen did not stop moving. When Rosa finished, the room was the particular kind of silent that follows the telling of small specific truths, the ones that do not appear in financial records or metadata logs, but that accumulate into something that no summary column can quite contain. Detective Okafor closed her notepad. She looked at me. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "I need to ask you something directly, and I need your answer on the record." She paused. "Do you wish to request any consideration for leniency in the charges brought against your daughter?" "You have that right. The DA's office will take a statement from you into account in determining how to proceed." The question settled into the room and stayed there. Martin came back from the kitchen with 2 cups of tea and set one in front of me and one in front of no one in particular and stood near the door. He did not look at me. He was giving me the room to answer without the weight of his opinion in it. I thought about the floor of my bathroom at 3 in the morning. I thought about a text message at 8:47 that had not contained an apology. I thought about $214,000 and 214 edits and a woman who had stood at a kitchen counter and looked at her father's broken coffee cup and said it was good documentation. And I thought about what it would mean to say yes, to soften what was coming, to find one more time the reason that made it forgivable. No, I said, I don't. Detective Okafor wrote it down. If I protect her from the consequences of this, I said, I am not saving my daughter. I am only saving myself from having to accept what she chose to become. Those are not the same thing. I looked at the desk, at Arthur's timeline, at 38 years of understanding what accountability was for. Let the record stand as it is. Martin put his hand on my shoulder again. This time, he left it there. After Detective Okafor left, Martin sat down across from me and looked at me for a moment without speaking. Then he reached into his jacket and placed a familiar white envelope on the desk. Richard left this, he said quietly. He said you'd know when you were ready. I looked at the envelope. This time I did not need to think about it. Yes, I said, I'm ready. Martin left me alone with it. He picked up his tea and walked out of the study without being asked, pulling the door closed behind him with the quiet care of someone who understood that what was about to happen in this room was not meant to have a witness. I heard his footsteps move down the hallway, heard the kitchen chair pull out, heard the particular silence of a man sitting down to wait for as long as was needed. I looked at the envelope. It was the same plain white as the one Richard had sent through Martin, no markings, no name on the front. Eleanor had never been theatrical about important things. She saved her expressiveness for the things that deserved it, the garden, the kitchen, the long conversations we used to have on the back porch in the early evening, when the light went gold and the day had finished requiring things from us. I picked it up and opened it. 2 pages handwritten, her handwriting the careful, slightly left-leaning script I had read on birthday cards and grocery lists and the margins of books for 31 years. I had not seen it in 3 years. The sight of it did something to my chest that I was not prepared for, even though I had thought I was prepared. I read it the way she had asked me to, all the way through without stopping. Edward, if you are reading this, then something I hoped would not happen has happened, and you have found your way through it, which means you are still exactly who I always knew you were, even when you forgot. I need to tell you some things I was not brave enough to say out loud, because every time I tried, you found a reason to hear something softer than what I meant. So I am writing it down where you cannot interrupt me and offer an explanation I am not asking for. I saw it coming. I want you to know that. Not because I am clever though I am, but because I was watching from a place you were not watching from the outside of your love for her, where the view is clearer. I watched for years. I said what I could. You heard what you were able to hear, which was never quite enough, and I understood that it was not a failure of your intelligence, but a consequence of your heart. You love too completely. It is the best thing about you, and it is the thing that nearly undid you, and I could not fix it for you. I could only build you something to land on when the fall finally came. The trust was Richard's work and my instructions, but the idea came from a conversation we had in the first year of our marriage. Do you remember? You told me about a case of family, an elderly father, a son who had waited until the father was too diminished to defend himself. You came home that evening, and you were angry in the way you got angry when justice had arrived too late to matter. You said someone should have prepared him. Someone who loved him should have seen it coming and prepared him. I was listening, Edward. I was always listening. I do not write this to tell you that you were wrong to love her. You were not wrong. Love is not the mistake. The mistake is believing that love obligates you to absorb harm without limit, that protecting yourself from someone who is hurting you is a betrayal of the feeling you have for them. It is not. It never was. She is our daughter. She will always be our daughter. What she chose to do does not change that, and it does not change that. I grieve it even from wherever I am now. But grief is not the same as excuse, and your kindness was never meant to be a resource for someone else to draw from without your consent. Be well, my love. Lock the door from the inside. Call Martin when you need to talk. Eat something that is not toast. And please, for the love of everything, let Rosa take care of the garden. She has better instincts for it than either of us ever did. I love you. I have always loved you. I will love you in whatever form love takes when it has nowhere left to go but forward. Eleanor. I folded the letter along its original creases and held it in both hands and sat in the study that had been hers with her books, in the order she had arranged them. Her ceramic dish on the corner of the desk, her photograph on the wall, and I let myself cry, in the way I had not let myself cry since the funeral. Not the controlled grief of a man managing his loss in public, but the real kind, the kind that comes from the place where you keep the things that are too important to leave anywhere accessible. I cried for the woman who had sat across from Richard Hale in March of 2019 with a prognosis in her hand and a husband in her heart, and had spent 6 weeks building a safety net instead of spending those 6 weeks on anything easier. I cried for 31 years of a person who had known my blind spots better than I knew them myself, and had loved me anyway thoroughly and without apology. I cried until I was finished. Then I folded the letter and put it in the inside pocket of my jacket close. I stood up and walked to the window. The garden Eleanor had tended for 20 years was going dormant in the November cold, the beds cleared and mulched the way Rosa had done it every autumn without being asked. I looked at it for a long time. Then I went to the front door and turned the lock myself. Not because anyone was coming, because I could. Because the lock worked the way it was supposed to work, and the hand turning it was mine, and the decision to turn it belonged entirely to me. I went to the kitchen and told Martin I was hungry, which made him laugh, the real laugh, the kind that means something, and he made eggs. And we sat at the table and talked about nothing important for an hour the way old friends do, when the important things have already been said. 3 weeks later, I filed the paperwork to establish the Eleanor Callaway Foundation, a small fund drawn from a portion of the recovered assets designated to provide free legal consultation to elderly individuals facing financial exploitation or unlawful guardianship proceedings. Richard agreed to serve on the board. Arthur handled the financial structure. Rosa, who had more practical knowledge of what vulnerable people actually needed than any of us, agreed to help coordinate referrals. It was not a grand gesture. Eleanor would not have wanted a grand gesture. She would have wanted something useful, something that worked quietly and consistently for people who needed it and did not know where to ask. I signed the foundation documents on a Tuesday morning in December, at my own desk, with my own pen at a time of my own choosing. Kindness is never wrong. What is wrong is being kind enough to hand your life to someone who only wants to own it. Eleanor knew that. She knew it clearly enough to build me a way back to myself before she left. And when the time came, she made sure I found it. There is something I have carried since the day I read Eleanor's letter that I want to leave with you. I spent 38 years helping other families protect themselves from exactly what nearly happened to me. I knew every warning sign, and still I almost lost everything. Not because I was foolish, but because I loved someone more than I trusted what I could plainly see. This is a family story, and like most family betrayal stories, it did not begin with cruelty. It began with love that had no boundaries and silence that mistook itself for kindness. Do not be me. Do not wait until you are lying on a cold floor at 3 a.m. before you allow yourself to see what has been in front of you. The people who truly love you will never need to diminish you to feel secure. I believe God puts the right people in our path at exactly the right moment. Rosa, Martin, Eleanor, who prepared the way before she left. Every family story has those people in it if you are willing to let them in. This family story is mine, and my personal conviction is this kindness without boundaries is not a virtue. It is an open door. Know the difference between the people who walk through it to be with you and those who walk through it to take what is inside. That is the quiet heart of every family betrayal. We do not talk enough about family betrayal because we love the people inside the silence. But silence only gives harm more time to settle in. If this family story moves something in, you leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribing to this channel is the quietest way to say, you believe these stories matter. Thank you for staying until the end. It means more than you know. The stories ahead contain some fictional elements crafted purely for reflection and understanding. If that is not what you are looking for today, no judgment at all. Choose what serves you best. But if you stay, I promise to make it worth your time.